Oh, Fathom, we do appreciate your note-taking efforts. Why don't you go out and get yourself a coffee?
It's so cleverly made, though. All right. So, welcome to like a whole pass book club.
We're reveling in the warmth today. We're feeling very warm.
Yes. Well, it's either that or turn on the heater, and I'm trying to balance that out. My space heater is my best friend and Dale's worst enemy. That dude stays hot. Yay. So I'm glad that this is our book for the month. It has turned out to be stellar, inspired choice, and also a lot to see what wants to shape up for our workshop next month. So I'm really loving the ways it can go, the different directions it can go. We could play with this one a lot. So what about you? How are you feeling about it?
I'm loving it. Forgive me if I'm glitchy today, y'all. I've been telling Monifa I'm having a little technical issue going on. I love the book and I agree. We talked in our live stream. So if folks haven't caught that, hopefully you will tune into the energies of the month and get an idea of how those align with our book. And the more we go into the book, the more we see the similarities with the energies. It is so divinely timed that we are exploring our likable, badass selves.
Exactly, exactly. So if you caught our podcast for the month, then you saw that we were already talking about these energies as being something that we have to understand and something that we are having to apply in the nature of seeing things in equal light, right? So those are our two things. So I decided that the full moon is a representation of the warmth being applied, and the new moon is a representation of the assertive energy being applied. That's a big conversation of how she makes the argument in the opening chapter as status being the controlling arm of power, in which people have been trying to approach the problem of feminine ability to master career and workplace dynamics as a power problem. And she has made a very good argument that it is not a power problem, it is a status problem.
And I think that is so insightful. I think as women and moving, trying to get ahead and make our own place in the workplace, whatever that is, whether you have your own business, you're working in an office, you're running the house. I think a lot of us assume that if we receive power, claim power, earn power, then we have done what we need to do to get ahead. And status is something that's easy to overlook. And would ephemeral be the right word? It's a very elusive sort of thing, somewhat intangible, although it comes from traits, genetic traits by right of birth and social status. It's funny how we keep coming back to the word when we're trying to define it. But it's so fascinating. And so I love that she took the time to write this book to help us wrap our heads around how we not only have power to rely on, but how we can cultivate and build that status.
Yes, yes. Um, Yeah, I mean, I think she has it right. I think that we haven't had the conversation enough around how status is impacting our positions of power, and and maybe even avoiding that conversation because of the disparities kind of naturally imbued by society and the kind of the what do you call it, stratosphere of how we see each other, right? Um, and so. it is kind of like, oh, maybe we've been avoiding this as much as we've been avoiding the power conversation in general, just because of all the ugly things that have been amassed from just the lack of understanding of what is needed about that, and um what can be distorted by that if we're not paying attention, you know? So I think we're kind of like skirting the corners on this one. And I love that she talks about it without charge. You know, she talks about it as somebody who's obviously kind of done the work on seeing both sides and seeing all sides of kind of the dynamics going on and the different things that are playing a role by studying the work, you know, studying how and researching how people act in these different environments. So I love her approach to having these conversations in a way that is truthful and also helpful. Like, which can sometimes one can get lost with the other. So yeah, and how status is about our measures of assertiveness and warmth, which I kind of mentioned already. Cart before the horse. I do that sometimes.
I've got the link in the chat, so if you're catching the recording, pull up that link and you can follow along. So our book notes are already getting a little lengthy. You know, I do love to record. I do love to record. And so I'm pulling all the great resources from the book. I pulled some images from the book. Hopefully you have it, but they're right here with kind of the key takeaways that I've pulled out so far. Um, we're making our way through the book on our initial pass and then doubling back to kind of bring out the core concepts. So lucky for you, this will get even longer. And down below the notes that go along with the index, the order of the book, I found online, being a marvelous professor, Allison has created a book club discussion guide. So I pulled in those questions, also the link to where you can find her YouTube videos where she talks about some of these and shares her own personal stories. So I love how accessible, like Monifa was saying, how accessible she keeps it, how um, not charged, because we get enough charge out of feeling disempowered about watching some numbskull have more status than we do when we've been there and they just got there. And so I love that this is really kind of just objective tools. Also, I'm pulling through the book the plays to practice that she lists in the book. So these are all right here with her spicy scale imported along. So that's definitely something I think would be interesting to come back to when we revisit this topic, and I have the date on that. So with our new format this year, we have our initial book club meeting. We're doing an overview this week, and then we come back in 4 weeks on March 6th to do our deep dive. So I think it would be really great if, as you're reading along the book, any of these plays to practice are difficult, or what's your experience? I think it's going to be really cool to share our experience with some of those, rather than, last year we were going at such a pace we didn't really have a chance to dig in more deeply and make things applicable. So we're kind of doing a little more circular so we can go a little deeper into the concepts this year.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the book club, I think when we do the podcast, it's really about what is awesome about what the book is and what the author is, and how what we're hoping for, like what we're hoping to get out of it. And for today, like we're talking about the book and what we've gotten from so far as we're reading through, and what we're looking to dive into deeper as we go. And then for the workshop, it's really about applying everything. So we're hoping that giving that extra time, right, into having more time to read it and then having more time to see how it applies to us, that you get more out of it in whole as a whole. So yeah, so I really like our setup this year. This one we yeah, we wanted to shift it to be even more juicy for you guys.
Yes.
So yay. All right. So are we starting with chapter one, or I kind of forgot chapter
Sure.
one.
I think that, like we've been talking about, understanding the difference between power and status. is really important. And some of the terms that you'll see there in the notes, um, I forget how she first refers to microaggressions. Incivilities, and then she gets into microaggressions. Microaggressions generally are inflicted upon groups with lesser status, right? So as women or people of color or different classes, might experience microaggressions in the workplace or in social structures, which I thought was a really great delineation to make. That's not something I've been aware of, but incivility in its context. And then he-peated is another word that was new for me. And I think I heard Abby Wambach speak to this. I don't remember what her book is. Is it Wolfpack? Speaking about women in traditionally male-dominated areas, right? She's a professional soccer player, and he-peated happens when you say something in a meeting and it doesn't really get much regard, but then a man says it, and suddenly it's a brilliant idea. He-peated you. And his status made it more recognizable and acceptable. And then mansplained, I think we're all familiar with.
Has been a popular term of non-endearment. Yeah, and so yeah, and I love that. I love that she brings that up again. Just the nuances of that is something that I've noticed in people speaking as well, because it's happened to me so much early in my life. And it is those things like kind of and I've noticed that she talks about it from just the beginning of the book, where she starts talking about those cues that are telling us who has the status in the room, right? And so in that information is where I'm starting to see, oh, those are the things that get prioritized when we're not speaking from our authority, from our aligned knowingness, right? So that is those are the things that I'm always speaking to. It's like, okay, you said it, but how did you say it? Like saying it does not count if it wasn't felt, right? If it wasn't felt in the way that you intended. So yeah, so communication is more than the words, right? And so yeah, so I love that she's picked up on this nuance in such a clear way that a lot of people can bring their understanding to. So cool. So yeah, and then yeah, and I think also just that truth of just in general, like you said, those groups, that truth is that every time that a group is applied that's inherently known as lesser status. She did have a definition for that, right? Like essentially that you are assumed to have the power and capability to accomplish something with or for them, right? So, um, and so, yeah, or I guess by yourself too, but yeah, it's just like that inherent assumption that you can add to their life in some way. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
she definitely goes into that in the book. Men are assumed to be of higher status than women. All things considered, equal education, equal job experience. People look to men and expect them to have higher status, right? And power, perhaps also. But I find it really interesting. And so she does reflect that. There are those of us who are working against gender or racial assumptions and perspectives. And so it makes this awareness all the more important because it's not fair that we have to work harder to prove that we have equal capacity. And the world that we live in is still of this construct. And so if we have the awareness, right, and if we don't get charged by it, as she demonstrates throughout this book, just because we understand it doesn't mean we need to be furious with it and smash the system. We can game the system. And I think that's a much more hopefully empowering perspective. It's like, okay, I understand the playing field that you're seeing me on, and I can manipulate your perception of me by the way that I engage. Not by being inauthentic, which I appreciate she speaks to in the book, but by recognizing that there are some ways that we can enhance our status.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah, that we can, that first of all, that we can, right? That there's something we can do about it. I think that's the empowering piece is that we 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 can apply this as a skill and that and like all skills though, I think it's always important to mention because I feel like people have this weird understanding of skill and talent. Like what's the difference? And like I feel like people are constantly confusing those things, and the skill is something that you have to practice to acquire and build, right? And to keep even. You have to practice, and I think that you just me as a teacher and knowing how essential that piece is not going out and saying, well, I know how this works. I'm just going to brute force apply this instrument, right? Like you want it's an experiment until you have enough experience that it's a skill, you know. So yeah, and she talks about that too, like kind of the levels of learning. I forget where that is, so we won't talk about that now. But like I said, I have a habit of jumping. It's like I'm gonna start talking about this because it's in my head. All right. Um,
I know we might be hopscotching a little bit. Monique was trying to keep me in order. Apologies, but we'll get to the same end. And that's just female
always.
logic at work, y'all. We're spaghetti.
That's how we do it. So yes. So yeah. And then the thing about I think playing the game, I think this is something that a lot of empathic people have a hard time with as far as this idea of power, the feeling of manipulation, and like beating people as a objective, right? And so she again is very clear. This is not about beating people. This is about having a sense of what a win means to to the status game, and it's about overcoming obstacles, right? It's not necessarily about beating other people at a game. It's about your personal um, your personal progress according to the work you've applied. In my opinion, that's how it works for me. And I think that's part of it. You have to find a way that works for you, right? So
Yeah, I think that what strikes me about it is, maybe the difference in the way the masculine version of success, which is to outperform, to defeat, to surpass, and what I believe is a more feminine version of success, which is there's plenty of pie, right? If we help each other out, we all get further. It's not a matter of I have more status than you, there's only this much status to go around. And maybe that's a powerful shift that we can hold. Men can get stuck in that paradigm of theirs and find it limiting, and we can beat them at their own game. When they
mhm.
have their eyes on one higher performer, we can be cultivating status and gaining the regard of our peers and have more of a voice at the table.
Yeah, I think again, I think I read that part around having that status, and she mentions like one of my mentors, Sasha Washburn mentions often that power, money, status in the hands of women goes further in community. And those are things that have been researched and the numbers found to be true. When power or money is added to a woman, that they spend more education on systems, on like improvements to the neighborhood, these kinds of things. Um, or in communities, right? So like churches and this kind of thing, because they're interested in the environment people are living in. And so yeah, and then also that we can help each other if we, with our increased status, just like with money. If you have money, then you can help people with money that need it, right? If you have status, you can help people that don't have status that need it and that deserve it. Like you feel like you have an ideal that they are matching, that you get to uphold and lift up in people's eyes, right? So that's something that we appreciate our peoples for. That's one like our favorite persons. I guess we all have our own individual versions of that. But like, Oprah is loved and beloved by this author and by many women because of the amount of people she's helped with her status,
Hmm.
and who she's chosen to help with her status, the less seen, but more impactful people that I think she's brought a lot of awareness to and improved society as a result, right? So,
And I love that example because, we're working through the aspects of status and what how people achieve that. And Oprah's the beautiful example of warmth and assertiveness. She stands up for herself. She stands up for the girls in her schools, the communities that she's chosen to be active in. And she's so warm. She's always giving, it makes her day to play Santa Claus.
yeah.
You get the book and you get the car and all of that, right? It's a beautiful example of how somebody who, again, working against type as a woman in television and in media and as a woman of color has been able to stake a claim and stay at the top as long as she has.
Right. Absolutely. Right. Exactly. And yeah, you just gotta love that, and and that's the thing, is that if you want more of something in the world, then you lead the way of bringing that into existence, and this is giving us the tools to do that. So I really love that she brings that up. So what are the components? We have our little picture here, our little, I mean, it's her picture that we put into the
I follow
document
that.
for you for quick references. Yeah, so and she has, we also have, oh, we already said that. And there's also a link to her book club thing. So just remember that so that you can see all of her highlighted points as well, because she has videos associated in the document. Anyways, moving on. Yeah. So warm and cold as an aspect of the warmth part of the warmth and assertive, right?
Warm and cold, and then assertive and submissive. So you can see these in the document, and some really, really helpful, kind of more descriptive types. Is
Yeah.
someone appreciative or are they quarrelsome? In terms of assertive and submissive, is someone dominant or are they timid? So you can really kind of get into the feeling of it just by reading through those words. But then they call it in the biz, interpersonal circumflex, where you bring these two scales together and then you can see how things shift really with the subtlety. So somebody who is assertive should have status because they hold their place, but if they're more cold as well as assertive, then that's perceived as a more hostile strength. And that's where I find it's really interesting. Somebody who has hostile strength doesn't tend to hold status. In the book, they dive into a study on women in education, teachers specifically in college, and how it shifts. Women who are in teaching starting out, they don't have a lot of power, they don't have a lot of status, they're women in education, and then they stay in that field for a number of years, perhaps decades. So their power grows because they hold that position for longer. They might take on more responsibilities, but as a woman, their status hasn't changed very much. And since their status hasn't changed very much, then our brain likes to fill in the gaps. And it's assumed because they have power but not status, are they hostile and strong or are they friendly and therefore weak? So it's interesting when you look at people who are lacking status, air quotes, where that perception plays in, because that's really what we have to recognize so that we can game that system, is recognizing that perception and where they come from.
Yeah, yeah. Um, and yeah, and what are people assuming? I find that, like, because she had a few stories that really stood out, but like like where are people putting that? Because she mentioned it, Kate, in the beginning of the chapter of this one, because she was a younger person at a company that had was getting a lot of respect from everybody on like executive level, managers, and so she was saw that just by the interactions that they were having in the hallway while she was visiting the facility. So um, and so she asked her like, what's going on? That's what her part of the research part is, questioning people. So and she talked about like how she added to them through presentations and how they respected the way that she could bring stories to the slides and uh, a good, clear manner. And so when that happens, like with somebody who's young and a woman, right? So those are two contributing factors to where somebody might assume a different status, right? And then somebody has a better understanding by how other people of status are viewing her, right? um, so that you can see where that's playing out, where, oh, that must be true status, because not only being warm to her, they're also giving her a certain amount of respect and asking her questions and seeing what her input would be. So that's showing both that they see her as warm and that they see her as a, good feedback, a problem solver, and that assertiveness, right? So it's pretty cool to like, again, it's also she some of her stories, she's like, hopefully you see that as a good story. And I'm like, no, I don't. I'm sorry. Like this one I did. This one was obviously, oh, that's really that is inspiring. That's somebody who's youthful, who may be easily discounted in a corporate environment, was getting that kind of recognition is very powerful to know that that's a possibility, right?
Yeah, and I think it was interesting too, in that example, she's really making the case for being helpful. Helpful people are perceived as warm, and it's a continuum. If you are helpful but not assertive, then you become a pushover and you lose status just as quickly as you might be able to build it because people assume that you're submissive. So it's finding that balance, bringing value, pointing out, right? So we helpful helps to build status, and being able to make sure people are aware of what we bring to the table, finding ways to do that. That's some of the really applicable tactical insights that she brings later on in the book, which is helpful.
Yes, yes, yes. And like, yeah, how to find your way of making that contribution, which is the skill of status growth here. So yeah, and then this is also where those task cues come in, where we have like kind of things that people are noticing, and all of these things are like, or at least they used to be non-existent for me. Like one of them is faster speech rate and shorter response to like information being had in a conversation or in a discussion meeting in a room. It's perceived as confident and knowledgeable. Talking the most. Evidently, if you just keep talking, no matter how inane it is, people find that to be status creating.
It
I
is
know it's,
assertive.
it
I
is
don't know if you're
assertive.
demonstrating wisdom all the time by that, but okay,
But I
appreciate
think
it.
like and we were just actually talking about archetypes, and like part of both of ours I think is this idea of mystique, where it's just kind of this understanding of nuance. We understand the difference between talking a lot and like contributing to the conversation. Like there's a difference, but I think in the overall it was pretty obvious that they blanketly were saying that if somebody had something to say really quickly, that it meant that they had more assertive um, you know, abilities to be capable in the room, which I don't see how that translates. But whatever, whatever.
Well, what I find really interesting too, because that's the way people operate, right? You either think quickly and have that quick comeback, or you're a person who thinks a little bit more slowly. And there's a point at which you can prepare and try to have things at the ready, but through the course of conversation or at meetings, it's really hard to study up on that, right? But you can also, in terms of, there's a really loud helicopter going over our house. Love life in San
Really?
Diego. I don't know if you
Give
can.
me 1 second. Oh, it's interrupting 1 second. Like,
Try to post our.
anyways, so husband is gone.
So,
Amazing.
and I almost lost my point, and then it finally came back to me. So even if you're not the kind of person who has the quick reply and can like command the conversation in a meeting, she shares the insight in the book that people who, when you're going into a room, if you're going into a room for a meeting, if we're keeping it old school, people who sit near the head of the table, who choose a seat at the head of the table, are perceived as having more power. So there's always an approach. If having that quick
Mhm.
reply isn't intuitive for you or the way that you're wired, there's other things you can do. I love her story about discovering that she has a resting bitch face. I think it's hilarious. She's like, smiling is not my jam,
Yeah,
but I'm funny. So she makes other people smile, and that helps her perception of being warm, even if she's not one of those people like I tend to be, who's got a smile ready and lifts the mood just like visually, right?
yeah,
She has the quick humor that gives her that power in the exchange.
exactly. Yeah, we like this is part of what we were saying before of just like you have to find your own style and approach to these things. Being somebody who's taken forever to respond because it's not necessarily, that I even don't understand what's going on. It's really more about, well, that's interesting first look. What about like I have questions and I need to hear a few other things before I have an opinion. I'm not just gonna automatically come out my seat with an opinion without getting the perspectives. And I'm more interested in the perspectives than I am in any final answer. That's another thing that people might find a little annoying about me. But what I have seen is that when I am a little bit, again, like based on these archetypes that we were just talking about, um, when I do that, a lot of people take that as having a wiser interpretation as well. So it may not come across the same way to all people, but it does mean that, it's worth speaking up. It's not, just because you're the last one to speak doesn't mean don't speak at all, right? And then if it's more, if you feel like you can offer more and make more of an impact by waiting a little bit until you get a little bit more digestion of what's going on, then that let that be true for you. That is your strong suit. You might as well do that in that way, right? So yeah, I think it's pretty cool. Pretty cool. You can apply it in different ways.
Yeah.
So what was
And
this
and
part?
oh, I didn't get around to getting the notes on the get your head in the game. Um,
Oh,
chapter 3, I haven't pulled highlights out of there yet. I was copy and pasting, in our final moments of prep. Um, so we'll come back to that in
yeah.
part.
No worries. No,
But
I just thought that it was a note that you wanted to talk about. Sorry.
it's a whole chapter. I'm sure there's a lot of goodies in there. And down below in the place to practice, so I wanted to remind folks about that. She talks about the different ways you can establish status or cultivate status as she's going through the chapters. So you can read through those, you can see what feels native to you, what's, how much of a stretch, right? She has a spicy scale. One flame she thinks is an easier ask, and three flames is a little bit more of a stretch goal or exercise. Um, but as she gets into chapter 4 and talking about her story, I actually remember seeing this interview that she describes in the book with Stacey Abrams on CBS Sunday Morning, because it's a show that I love and Now we don't have like regular TV, so I would seek it out sometimes on YouTube. And I saw this interview with her as she was running for governor in Alabama, I believe. And she was asked by the interviewer, "Do you believe you could be president of the United States?" Which is like, she's running for governor. She's not already the governor, right? And how, what kind of question to put someone on the spot? And you can imagine that, like, you're in a job interview and they might say, you know, what position do you ultimately think you'd be qualified for? Do you think you could be a C-suite executive? Like, how audacious. And as women, we're really trained not to, you know, speak that. I'm trying to think of like
Yeah.
how are we told, right? Like tall poppy syndrome. Like who do you
Yeah,
think
tall
you
poppy.
are
Who do you think you are?
to say you could be
Like,
president of the US?
just to have the aspiration is laughable, right? So this just an excuse really to laugh at you for having an aspiration. But yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, it's interesting that dynamic. It's a very interesting that they even asked her. It's just kind of K-pop. I don't know what people are thinking. Yeah, so yeah, so that idea, and yeah, I remember that story very clearly because I was like, ooh, yeah, expert response, which is the comment by the author as well.
Yes.
Um, where she was like her basically her response was that um that just by her and the people that she feels that she is giving inspiration to, for the young women and the young women of color out there, she could only say yes to that type of feeling, right? So yeah, so I was just like,
Hmm.
ooh, because that
Goosebumps.
does, it passes on that idea of like, it's not just about my aspirations, it's about the aspirations of everybody that I impact, right?
Right.
So it's very assertive and it's also very warm because she's thinking of others. That's another aspect of warmth. Yeah, being in service to others.
Exactly.
So
So owning
yeah.
your power and then softening that assertive edge by being inclusive, by stating more of a goal or a mission. And I think that, like we were talking about earlier, talking about feminine leadership styles, something that maybe comes more naturally to women, but also starts to speak to, we have to hold the mic. When we're given an opportunity to answer a question like that, we can't, as the list goes on in our notes there, and she goes much deeper into the different ways that we get in our own way. We can't humble brag. We can't, like, all of a sudden have that tall poppy syndrome and be afraid of standing out or being too boastful. We have to seize that opportunity because it's up to us a lot of the times to shine a light on the reasons why we're worthy of status, why we are powerful and competent and capable women. And I love this as she gets further into the book. Um, a lot of people don't remember the source. They just have the input and confirmation bias, filed it away. There's nothing to contradict it. So she believes she could be the president of the United States, and she wants to hold that space for Black girls who are watching her ascend through power and the way that she lives her life and believe that they can do it too. And that feeling that you get then is attached to her. Like I said, that interview was years ago, and I still remember that conversation. And so, as she gets into the reasons the ways in which we get into our own way, it's important to remember too, like, we feel really conspicuous and the nerve of me to toot my own horn. But in the end of things, people don't tend to remember, right? It's just input that they've received and they take it to be true unless it is disproven. So get it, girls. Let them know.
Yes, and she was also saying that you can always kind of add to it. You can't necessarily like take away a perspective, right? But you can add to it because she was talking about how, yes, with that power dynamic and people of higher power considered more, you know, hostile, that kind of thing. Um, so when she was saying that, she's like, yes, and and it's a good idea just to do that anyways, because you can add warmth later, but you can never like kind of gain back that time to be assertive, right? Also that bragging again, that first hit may be a hit, right? Um, for women or certain kinds of women, but in the outcome of it, they just know that you have the capability afterward. They don't necessarily remember, like Susie saying, that it came from you, that you have the capability, right? And so, yeah, and so I think you can always add warmth from there. But so it's not necessarily a loss. It's a loss to win or and to what's next, you know. So sometimes you just have to do it, have to do the thing. Yeah, and the promotional thing, I think it is that's why I really like the way she talks about these things because it's like, okay, yeah, maybe I won't be the person that's like, I'm awesome, look at my butt. Um, so that works for some people. but but like I definitely am the person that'll be like, you know, look at what my best friend is doing. Look at what my clients are doing. Look at what like I can brag from my impact on the people that I've influenced around me, right? That kind of thing. So I think knowing that about yourself and feeling comfortable and finding where that place where that brag feels comfortable for you is something you want to know about yourself and maybe build the skill of, right?
Yeah, I love when advice is more additive than like subtractive or correctional. And so exactly like Monique was saying, you know, she says you don't have to, if this is the way you are, that's the way you are. And how can you also let people know what else you're doing, how else you're available, how you can support them, how you've accomplished this in the past, and that's why you're capable of this right now. Right. So by adding to it rather than feeling like, oh, I need to be less critical. No, maybe you bring that to the table, you have discernment, and you pay attention to how you're delivering it so you can bring warmth into it and you're not putting people off with cold delivery, right? So that awareness and not feeling like we have to correct or, you know, reshape ourselves, just expand ourselves.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Yes. And I do think that that's something, you know, that got confused in the creation of trying to obtain the power over the years, right? Of like kind of getting anywhere near the positions that we should be in as women in the fields of our careers. So like and like just that constant reminder that it doesn't have to be a cold response. I think is a good thing to go with, right? Like that assertiveness does not have to be cold, right? Because I think sometimes you just feel like we have to put that on just to get the respect, but you don't necessarily have to. It's just, you know, you have to, you need to have it. You need to have an assertion of something. So the next one is that story piece, right? Telling your own story. So that if, again, maybe you don't brag about yourself, but maybe just say simple truths about what is true about you and your story, which I like to call. Um, oops, I forgot the name. I was trying. Oh, Hera's story. It's like that's what I call in my cosmic prosperity. Hera's story,
Oh,
basically your
yes.
hero story for women. That's what I was trying to
Hira,
say.
Hira's story.
Yeah, yeah. So,
And, you know, as she's going through the list of the things that we do, I think that, you know, one or many or all, you know, we can find ourselves guilty of at different points in time. And it really struck a chord with me as I was listening to her go through that, talking about, you know, when we conceal our success. And then if someone finds out about it later, their feeling is generally, why didn't they tell me, right? Why would you hide that from me? Do you not think that I'm important? Do you not, am I not a friend? So
Oh,
it's
yeah.
interesting to look at those from other perspectives and recognize that the ways in which we get in our own way are because of this is our point of view, and we don't see our actions the way other people receive our actions. And so
Mhm.
that perspective is really big when we're playing this game of having status. Status is all about interpersonal relationship. So it doesn't mean that you have to change yourself. And recognizing how we appear to other people is really important.
Yeah, yeah, it's really helpful. So, yeah, I mean, I have had that experience because for a long time I wasn't telling people that I sang opera because I didn't want to have this perception that my standards were above like the average Joe Schmo, right? Like I didn't want this idea that I could that wasn't willing to work with people that hadn't had a certain level of skill or experience. And and so just to avoid the conversation, I just wasn't telling people for a while. So like literally my first client has been with me for too long right now. And like it's this she found out late, right? She found out much later. And there was kind of this stunned look I remember now on that was on her face when I told her that I don't know like if I, I have to imagine that this is some of what was going through her head, where she was saying that, like, why do you think that I didn't have the wherewithal to take that or to whatever, like, it was coming across as. So, so yeah, so that's the thing is that this is like real life and real relationships, and it is like I wish I had known that earlier. I wish I had known stuff like that earlier because I would probably have communicated more about my story. It even makes me think now there's things about my story that I'm not talking about that I probably should talk about more often, as part of what people can know me to be, right? They can expect certain things from me, right? So yeah, yeah, it's just those you live and you learn, and then you meet amazing, smart other women that are giving you the tools to be awesomer, and you apply them. And that's what this life is about. So that's that next one. Oh, the advertising failure. I think this women do this all the time. What is that about?
Right. It's right up there with, yeah. I was going to say it's right up there with humble bragging, but I think it's even a little bit worse. What is that knee jerk reaction that we have to broadcast? Oh, I messed up so bad. Do we feel it makes us more relatable? Maybe.
Maybe.
And it depends on our audience, right? And it's important to remember who our audience is in communication with.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's public failures in which you get to claim as a responsible person that you stand up, um, for what you are integrity about moving forward, right? But there's also like the unnecessary contribution of what you suck at, right? Like we don't necessarily need to talk about that part. I think I do this in very subtle ways. I'm always kind of undercutting my strength in certain areas by saying that, oh, but it's okay because I suck at this part, so you don't have to feel intimidated by me. Um, but like it doesn't work. First of all, the people that are intimidated. That's not changing. Like it's gonna. And then the suckiness part, people just remember that you suck. They don't necessarily remember that. They ever say like, be like, yeah, but she's really great at dot dot dot.
Because if you haven't told them that you're really great at dot, 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 how do they know? The only thing they hear
Yeah,
you say is, oh, I've got so many typos in my emails. Oh, I'm so slow getting back to people in my emails. And she even, I love her story when this is blending into unnecessary apologies, but um, she replied to somebody who sent her an email saying, sorry, I didn't get back to you sooner. Well, she was literally giving birth. she wasn't available, right? But she didn't even have to open the reply with, sorry, I didn't get back to you earlier. She didn't need to advertise that she was slow in replying, right? So that's kind of a combination, but an example of like,
Well,
yeah,
and
you
that
didn't answer
response was
immediately.
still within like 6 hours or something crazy. Like you could have still been in labor. Like that is not a slow
It's so
response.
funny.
You're literally lying. You're lying right now, right? Like, so I think anything within 24 hours is considered timely, in my opinion, unless it's like your boss and during the workday, they expect you to be at work, right? Like that, it's different. But if it's just some random communication from random people that you weren't expecting, I think within 24 hours is respectful. I don't know, because it's not 24 hours for me. It's like, if I can get back to you within 3 to 5 days, I think I'm rocking this shit, right? So I don't know, but that's my opinion.
Expectations.
I'm sticking to it.
Well, and talking about unnecessary apologies takes me back to earlier in the book when she's talking about powerful speech and powerless speech, right? When people tend to end sentences in a question over and over, they don't really end things as a declaration. When they say, maybe if you have time, I hope you don't mind, and they're framing things. And she points out that people who use powerless speech are perceived as warm. So you can be mindful of your use of that and use that to frame things that are assertive and add some warmth to it, as long as you're aware of what the speech patterns indicate. And so, a lot of us, and she talks about in the book, women apologize more than men. No surprise there. No surprise there, right? Like women have this compassion. I'm sorry you had a bad day. I'm sorry the weather has been terrible. And men see absolutely no reason to feel compassion for it. It wasn't their fault. They didn't make it rain. It doesn't occur to them, to extend that empathy the way that women do. Um, and we get to be aware of what we're apologizing for. If it is empathy, yes. If we're apologizing for something as if we're taking fault for things that are not our fault, knock that off. And I love the tool that you shared in the book. I didn't get the Chrome extension, but I love that somebody made this called Just Not Sorry. And it's literally a Chrome extension that scans your emails and underlines apologies so you see how many times you are offering those in your messages.
Yeah. I actually found this when I started writing more emails because for a long time I wasn't communicating at all. So when I started writing more emails, I started looking for the things that made what I wanted or disguised what I wanted with the outcome, what I
Yeah.
understood the outcome to be or desired outcome to be. Um, that disguised it. And now I see that reflected as apologies. There's kind of just those words like that, kind of, right? Like I said, it's not all your crappy statements, it's kind of your crappy statement. Right? Like to soften the blow. I found that I like my directness is very direct. And so I do need softeners, but I don't need qualifiers. And I feel there's a difference because the softeners are warm, the qualifiers are detractive. They're taking away from the impact of the statement. So yeah, I think it could be really powerful to look at those things.
Yes. And this is another one of those cases where, I mean, we're happy to be your buddies, but bring someone else in along with you, share the book and share what you're working on so that you have somebody you can share your stories with, because that accountability and recognition and reflection is so helpful um, in making
Yeah,
change.
absolutely. And I'm looking forward to our workshop. So dive into the
Yay.
book and see like all those nuances that may be a little bit different for you. And we are gonna start playing with those spices. So the spicy suggestions on how to apply your likable badass nature, right? So she has spice levels. So we're gonna play. I know we're playing with that because it's too fun. So like so there's like kind of a little spicy, a little badass. There's like high heat badass going on. So that you can, yeah, so that we can decide where you want to jump into the pool. Um, yeah, so
Yeah.
anything to add about our workshop?
We might have put things out of order there. Forgive me. Oh no, I see what I did there. We've got the spicy and we've got the storytelling audit, which is another great exercise if you have the opportunity to take a look at that in the upcoming weeks. Our workshop is going to be 4 weeks from today. It's so easy, March numbers, because March numbers line up with February numbers when it only has 28 days. So on
Yes.
March 6th, we will be back to continue our conversation to talk about our spices, our aha moments from the book, what you think about it, what you're getting out of it.
Yeah. So yeah,
Things are
come,
coming.
come with, right? And yeah, and if you have any chance to try anything out, then come with that too. Tell us how it went. So looking forward to it in March, and we'll see you guys then.
Yay! We'll see you then. Thanks for playing.